Hello, I'm Bill O'Donnell and welcome to another program on spirituality. Today in the studio I am thrilled to have as my guest retired Brigadier General Bill Fields, who is here to tell us a little bit about the military order of world wars and some of the work that they're doing. And I want to thank you, Bill, for coming in.
Hey, it's great to be here, Bill.
All right. I met Bill some time ago at the Celebration Church services where I heard him speak and was very impressed with it. And as I grew up with my father having served in World War II, I thought it'd be great to get a little insight from somebody who actually was there and shared in those experiences, and to give us hopefully some insight and advice for younger generations coming up and what you've learned during your time.
Okay.
All right. Tell us about you. Where were you born and raised?
Well, you know, for a long time I had conflicting stories. I had two birth certificates. One of them in southeastern Oklahoma near Durant, and the other one in northeast Texas at my grandmother's house. And my mother told me that my dad had filed the first one in Oklahoma, and she had filed the second one. But that's where I was really born, I think.
What year was that?
1925.
Okay. So where did you grow up?
Well, my dad worked for the old, what they called Indian service in those days, and he was working in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and they transferred him because of his health. He was wounded badly in World War I. Into Crown Point, New Mexico, and so I moved to New Mexico in 1927.
How old were you at that time?
2 years old.
You were 2
You're
years
not
old.
quite two.
Yeah.
June, just was 1 month shy of 2. I don't remember much about Oklahoma or Texas.
Yeah.
We visited there some during the Depression, but not
Yeah.
too much because people didn't have money in those days to go traveling around.
Right. So you also, as I understand it, you are a part Native American. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I say I'm Indian. I don't like the word Native American. The American government brought the blood quantum in, which I think is not good, because you could be a full blood if you were raised in Germany. You'd be a German, and
I see what you mean.
so I was raised as an Indian.
Mm-hmm.
I went through the manhood rites, and I learned how to do dances when I was young. Matter of fact, when I was 9 and 10, I danced with a friend of mine who was Pawnee Shawnee, and we used to spin ropes and do a dance at the Gallup ceremonials about 1935 and 36, somewhere around there.
You know, I thought of you, and I recently saw a TV newsreel that was done, I think, right around that time in the early 40s or late 30s, early 40s, something like that, in that Gallup. I knew you'd been there. So what was it like growing up out in that area at that time? And by the way, let's just tell people out there understand, so would it be more appropriate then to refer to Indians as Indians? And
well, that's what I like. Everybody who's born in the United States is a Native American.
Right.
And so the older goats like the word Indian because that's what we always knew. And if you'll notice, when people talk, most of them still use the word Indian.
Okay.
The anthropologists and the politically correct use Native American. And the younger Indians like the word Native American.
Okay. Well, then, as I understand it, around the age of 17, after World War II broke out, you decided to step up to the plate and you went into the service. What was happening to you at that time, and what made you decide to do that?
Well, I would like to mention that I went to Indian school up through the 4th grade, and then the BIA Reorganization Act of 1934 required anybody whose parents worked for the Indian Service to go to public school. So my mother took me and my sisters to Albuquerque to go to school, and then in high school I went to Farmington High School up in northwestern New Mexico. I graduated when I was 16. from Farmington High in 1942. And on Pearl Harbor Day, I had tried to join, along with other guys, and because I wasn't old enough, they turned me down. So on my 17th birthday, I joined the Marines to go fight the war.
Can you remember back what you and your friends felt like when you heard this information, and what was the impetus that led you to enlist?
Well, by the New Mexico National Guard was activated in January of 1941. It was the old 200th Cavalry Regiment, and they were activated and became Coast Artillery, 37 millimeter, and they were shipped to the Philippines in September of 41, in time to be caught in that horrible war in the Philippines. And by April the 9th of 1942, all of our guys were prisoners of war. And we started hearing stories about the death march. And so I joined the Marines to go fight the Japanese and to liberate a lot of friends of mine. You know, age-wise, I was a little younger than they were, but some of them were in my grade.
Yeah.
And so I left in July of 42, went to boot camp.
Yeah. So this was personal, really, because you knew people that had been
Well, it's
captured.
also an Indian. American Indians have always joined up and fought, even before we were citizens.
Yeah.
My dad wasn't a citizen of the United States till 1924, the year before I was born. They weren't recognized as citizens. They've always fought in wars, and percentage-wise, the American Indian and the Latino Hispanic people were among the highest percentage of casualties in World War II. And as a matter of fact, I think all of the wars. So my dad was a member of the old 2nd Army Division, 9th Infantry in World War I. He got wounds which resulted in the loss of his left hand. And I was raised a son of the American Legion and went with him in his uniform. And my mother used to dress up as a Red Cross nurse, and then we would go to 4th of July parades and Memorial Day and Flag Day and all kinds of things. And I belonged to the Sons of the American Legion Drum and Bugle Corps. And we'd go down the street and march in these parades. And so I was inclined to, as my dad said to my mother when she didn't want to sign for me, well, he's going to go anyway, might as well sign.
So what type of service did you see in World War II?
Well, I went in 3rd Marine Division, went overseas in December of 42, and part of my unit were in on some of the last days at Guadalcanal. My first combat was at New Georgia Island, Munda, New Georgia, in June of 43, and then in November of 43 we hit Bougainville in the northern British Solomon Islands, and I got hurt a little bit and came home, and then got a nice soft job for a while, and then I went back in and was in the 6th Division. Well, I was a replacement going to the 6th Division when they dropped that wonderful atomic bomb that kept me from getting killed.
Yeah, my father was a Navy officer at Battle of Okinawa, and they were all his contemporaries were very pro about that. Can you give us some idea of what your experience of combat was? What do you recall from that actual experience of fighting?
Well, it's hard to talk about experiences in combat. The one thing you can say, you're always scared. I think Bill Malden probably had the best best picture that I ever saw is when it showed Willie and Joe in Italy crawling along on their belly, and the bullets are flying over, and Willie is saying, "But I can't get no lower, Joe. Me buttons is in the way." And I, you know, if you look at Bill Malden's cartoons, you see the real infantryman or Marine, and of course all the services saw horrible things. War is a horrible thing, and I think when you get together with people that knew where you were and what you were doing, you don't talk too much about the combat. You talk about stealing the beer from the officers' club or something like that.
Yeah. So when you came back, I understand that you transferred to the National Guard, and you went as a sergeant and you came out as a brigadier general. That sounds like an interesting area of inquiry. How and the history of the National Guard here in New Mexico is extraordinary.
Yeah,
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
sure. I came back, well, to start with, when I raised my right hand, and I joined the USMCR, which a lot of the old timers looked down on in the Marines. And I hadn't know it, but I'd signed up for 10 years. And so when I came back, I enrolled in the University of New Mexico. And by the way, I already had a wife and a little boy. And so I wasn't making any points. I was there available for a recall, but I wasn't getting any training. And one of my best friends since I was a very little boy, retired Major General Frank Miles, who lives here in town. And Frank at that time was a first lieutenant adjutant for the Guard, and he transferred me over. And I didn't know how to spell lieutenant, but they made me one after that. And then I stayed on each time that I was about to get retired. Well, I'd make another promotion. And so I stayed really I had a total of 40 years. And then Frank, it helps to have friends, you see. And Frank became the adjutant general. And then and he made me a battalion commander and a command and control commander, and then I ended up as chief of staff. And the brigadier general is a National Guard rank in the state militia. My retired grade from the U.S. Army was Colonel, 06.
Yeah. So you had a distinguished career also in the National Park Service for 17 years as an engineer?
No longer than that, 31 years.
31 years.
The Park Service. My last 17 years, I had one of the best jobs in the world. But I graduated as a civil engineer with a specialty in hydraulics. I got a little bit. I did work on my master's in hydraulics. And so I went to work as a water rights hydraulic engineer for the Park Service for about 14, 15 years. And in 1969, they passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, and that required all federal agencies to adhere to a set of new policies concerning spiritual things, especially the spiritual beliefs of the American Indian or Native Americans with the parks, and allowed them to do things which were contrary to the 1916 National Park Service law. So I became chief of the region Indian Assistance Program, and I had design engineers and architects, etc., and we helped the Indian people design buildings and recreation areas and campgrounds. Out here at Tasuki, we designed that campground at Tasuki.
All right. So you got involved in respecting Native American or Indian rights and Indian beliefs. What religion, if any, were you raised as a kid?
I was raised in the native Indian way. That was an agreement my father and mother had, and so he was very much into his beliefs, and then I was so fortunate to learn a lot of things from a medicine man at Crown Point who was Navajo, and his name was Harry Yazzie. But also my dad's partner. My dad was what they would call now a maintenance engineer at the schools, but he was a janitor. His job was to keep the boilers and things, and then the man who did the janitorial service was a man by the name of Eli Foreman, who was Shawnee and was already pretty old. He was born in 1870, so this would have been in the 30s. He would have been already 60 years old when I knew him. And he had traveled with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show.
What did he tell you about that experience?
Oh yeah, he said we always lost. They would ride their horses, and he said he was a Shawnee, but he'd wear Sioux feathers and get on the horse and fire blanks and run around and scream and yell and holler. But he got paid good, and he got to go to England and Germany and what have you.
So it was
He also was very, very adroit in things that needed to be done. And he and Harry Yazzie and my father, then when I reached what we call puberty, I went through the manhood rites.
What can you tell us about those?
Well, it varies, of course. Every tribe has its own way of doing things. But generally speaking, it's a teaching process. And the thing that comes out very early is, number one, you're becoming a man. Number two, you can become a father if you aren't careful. And number three, you need to take responsibility for your actions. And so all of these things you hear about vision quests and everything, there's a process of, well, in my own case, a fast.
For how long?
Well, they call it on 4 days fast, which at that time also was without water. And in the high mountain country around Crown Point, New Mexico, that can be very, very dangerous. But just to make a short story shorter, it taught me that, for instance, at that age, that girls and sex were not the most important thing in the world. The most important is thirst, and then hunger, warmth, physical comforts, and then social things down the line. It taught me that. It taught me to take responsibility. If I didn't take care of myself out there, I would have been wiped out.
How old were you at that time?
13.
Yeah. So, and you also told me beforehand that you had some exposure to Christianity as a kid too. How did that work with your Indian way?
Well, it was very, very confusing on those early days, and I'm not saying anybody is wrong, but the approach to converting people, in my case, was fear. The reservations all over the United States were broken up by church, and the Navajo reservation had several churches around St. Michael's, Window Rock, in that area where the St. Michael's Church is now. That was Catholic. Where I lived on the eastern fringe of the Navajo at Crown Point were the Assembly of God and the Fundamentalists, and then other places were Presbyterian. The Methodists had the mission in Farmington. But my exposure was severe because of their teaching of fear.
Yeah.
of God, and it's kind of unhealthy, but my dad would always straighten me out after I get scared. And it's kind of a shame they teach that way, but that's the way it happens sometimes.
Yeah. What's your perspective on it now as you've matured and gone through and you've seen both and you've had some experience? How do you look at religion now?
Well, I think all people have a right to their religion, and I admire and respect the beliefs of everybody, including the ones who want to teach fear. That just didn't happen to touch. Doesn't work too well with the Indian people as a rule, because they're not they're traditionally passive socially, and they're traditionally nonviolent socially.
Yeah.
They had a hard time getting the Navajo code talkers to fight each other. In the Marines, we all had to put the boxing gloves on with everybody else, you know. And then that's not their way of doing things. And so they're Indian people are a little different. They don't believe in the same sense of values. Time, for instance, is completely different. They laugh about Indian time, but time to do something is whenever everybody's there.
Okay. Well, listen, our time has come. We want to talk a little bit before the time gets away from us about the role of military order of the world wars that you are a member of and are promoting their values. Tell us a little bit about that and what value it has for society today.
Yeah, military order of the world wars is one of the older military organizations. It was formed by General Pershing in 1919 at a time when we thought that we'd fought the war to end all wars. And through the years, the military order has decided to dedicate itself to teaching America's youth the values of patriotism, the flag, the Constitution. Unfortunately, they don't teach a lot of that in schools today. And I can see why. There's been so much history made that it's hard to get it all in, and you know. But we have, around the country, we have about 25 different schools where we teach 4-day sessions on patriotism, the Bill of Rights. We have the kids, we take sophomores and juniors, and we take them in there and we get them up early and we raise the flag and we do the Pledge of Allegiance. And at the end of those 4 days, we've had lots of young people saying, "My goodness, I'm glad I came here." We also have one-day seminars, or we call them one-day conferences now, where we try to teach some of that in a one-day session. Bring them in and give them a hit and miss, at least get them to thinking along constitutional rights, Supreme Court decisions, love of the flag and country. And so that's really what we do. We're selling tickets right now. By the way, I happen to have some here.
Okay.
Raffle tickets to raise money to send these kids. This particularly, my chapter, the Santa Fe chapter, has a man by the name of Colonel Dell Lewis and his wife Dorothy, who have done a tremendous job of putting together a 4-day course at Philmont Scout Ranch, and a 4-day course in El Paso along with Colonel Rafael Garcia down there, and seminars and 1-day courses. And this summer in July, we're having a 4-day course at the New Mexico Military Institute as well as the one at Philmont.
How can people get more involved, either kids or adults that would like to help out?
Yeah, well, just my phone number is 505-471-3741. And if you're interested in helping us, give me a call. We can always, you know, I'll sell you raffle tickets, of course. And by the way, this year it's a beautiful squash blossom type coral necklace is the first prize. And We need people who would like to help as instructors for one-day seminars. Most of all, we need young people who are sophomores and juniors.
In high school?
In high school. And we'd like for you, if you want to sign up and spend 4 gorgeous days in Philmont in the late August, we'll be glad to talk to you. We just think that this is what we've got to do. The average age now, you know, of World War II veterans is up in the 70s, and we're not going to be around very long. And we feel like they haven't really been teaching these values in school like they taught us. Of course, we're prejudiced, you know, we're smarter than everybody else. But
give us a hit on the what do you see as you've raised your kids and you've seen many generations come? What's in just a couple minutes we have left, what's the real value to society for teaching these values?
Well, the value, of course, is that it teaches faith in your country, and it teaches young people to think and to appreciate. And regardless of what the papers say, most of the young people in this country believe as we do. We just kind of steer them. And one last thing, on June the 14th, which is the real Flag Day, we're going to have a massing of the colors on the Santa Fe Plaza. Mayor Larry Delgado is going to be the speaker. We're going to have colors from as many as we can. All the veterans organizations, if you have a church, you have a service organization, and you have some flags, bring them down there, and let's have a real rousing, old-fashioned Flag Day on the plaza, June the 14th, and it starts at 1 o'clock, or for you military guys, 1,300 hours.
Well, for young people, we only have a couple of minutes. Tell them why it's important to honor the flag.
The flag is the symbol of freedom, and if you don't know about it, you should take time to learn. The red, the white, the stars all have a meaning, and you need to learn that. And you need to learn that that symbol to the United States is ever much as important as the symbols of the Star of David or the cross of Jesus Christ. It's a symbol of unity and beauty and harmony.
All right, I appreciate that. Well, we've run out of time. I can't thank you enough for coming in, Bill, and sharing some of this with you. I'd love to have you come back sometime. And for those of you who are just seeing this, please go down to the plaza on the 14th on Flag Day in Santa Fe, or get a hold of him. Watch the credits, take his number and call and find out more about the Military Order of World Wars and perhaps what you can do to help out. So on behalf of everybody here at Spirituality, I want to thank you for viewing, and stay tuned next week at this time for another program on spirituality.
Thank you.
Good. All right, we'll just sit here quietly.